Story of a guy named Ignaz Semmelweis, I think, is really telling. It's Vienna in the 1840s. Semmelweis works at Vienna General Hospital. He's a young doctor, and they have two maternity wards. One is midwives delivering babies, and the other is the best trained, wealthiest male doctors. In the doctor ward, you're about 10 times as likely to die while giving birth to a child. And the maternal mortality rate in that ward was hitting 18%. You had a 1 in 5 chance of dying depending on which door you walked through. Not that anyone paid attention to that or knew that. See, the doctors, it turns out, and Semmelweis saw this. By the way, first thing he tried, it's interesting, he experimented. He saw that the midwives were having the women give birth on their sides. So he said, let's try that. And he checked, they were still dying. The next thing he saw is that there was a priest walking around, ringing a bell and giving blessings to the women only in the doctor's ward, because midwives weren't very important. And he thought, maybe the priest is literally scaring the bejesus out of them. So maybe we won't do that. And he literally told the guy to bugger off for a while. No change in the data. And then he notices one of the doctors coming from an autopsy room. And he thinks, I wonder if there are, quote, cadaverous particles on their hands. By the way, that's both a scientifically accurate and somehow poetically horrifying phrase he came up with there. And he decides, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should wash our hands before we put them into another human. Other doctors were offended. They rejected him. They mocked him, even though the death rate after he made them wash their hands dropped to 2%, almost instantly. The doctors said they would never kill their own patients. How dare you offend me? And so Semmelweis, who knew he was right, who actually published at the time the data to prove it, kept watching women die unnecessarily, and he eventually broke. He had a psychotic break. He was institutionalized, beaten, and died of sepsis himself. And of course, the tragedy of this is not just Semmelweis' story. It's that it would take decades and the work of Pasteur and widespread acceptance of germ theory before this became standard medical practice to wash your hands. Scientists who tell us inconvenient truths are often facing prosecution throughout history, and persecution, both. I meant to say persecution, but they both work, huh? Galileo famously was shown the instruments of torture by the Roman Inquisition in 1633. Bruno had already been burned in the stake a long time ago. Copernicus, by the way, got off easy because he died before anyone could persecute him. Bruno was killed. Galileo was pretty clear that, you know what? We're not in the center of the universe. But this offended the church. And so he was shown the instruments of torture and asked whether he would like to recant his implication that the earth revolves around the sun. Instead of torture and certain death, he chose to spend the rest of his life under house arrest. And the Catholic Church did not admit its mistake until 1992, my final year of college, 359 years later. And to John Paul's credit, he did admit his mistake and then teach Catholics that the way God works in the world is through evolution. And as a Catholic, there's an encyclical that says that's how God works. That took a long time to get there. How comforting it must have been to Western European scholars that the universe was designed to revolve around the earth, particularly one group of people of one gender with one skin color in one corner of the world. What a soothing thought, and how utterly and pathetically wrong. And science and data denial are not unique to one political extreme or the other. Although I would argue, I think you might too, that right now, actual attacks on journalists or judges skew partisan. When conservatives pretend that windmills, EVs, or solar panels are somehow worse for the environment or more expensive than continuous global petrochemical mining, they aren't doing cost-benefit analysis. They're saying what they want to believe. Similarly, when liberals argue that nuclear power or genetically modified foods are too dangerous, or that we could feed the whole planet only with organic food, they're making emotional claims. And I've been guilty of this myself. Those are claims I've made in the past and then force myself to look at the data and change. It's hard. I'm no longer afraid to fly on planes either. That was really hard. So when we do this, we're using emotion. Take this example. How about when liberal and conservative neighbors get mad at State Farm for trying to raise their insurance premium in fire-prone areas based on climate change modeling? It seems to not matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're mad at State Farm, which, by the way, has a relatively low profit margin compared to other businesses and hasn't made any money in California for 10 years before these fires, right? That is bipartisan data denial. Your insurance rates are going up or you're not going to get insurance. It's that simple. How about this one? Americans spend $50 billion a year on multivitamin supplements. That's more than the USAID budget. There is zero evidence that multivitamins help any disease or extend human life. And that's what I've seen doctors do. My own doctor takes a multivitamin. He can't give me a study that shows there's any point to it. We're all human. On the right, I do fear denialism, meanness, and capitulation to the new oligarchs who seek to capture our economy. Pretty obviously, if you ask me. There seems right now to be only a desire to break things, not to find Republican ways to make the economy work better. We're breaking things to own the libs. Everything is about owning the libs. That's certainly not science. On the left, I fear that the desire to be morally correct, maybe even superior, overshadows the need to be pragmatic. No cultural identity is going to be spared the tragic results when those who respect science lose elections. You have to win the elections. So we face very serious problems that are complex and are subtle. Problems that require rational, evidence-based thinking, data-driven decisions. Foremost among these, global warming and biodiversity collapse. Let me be unequivocal. Climate change is real, accelerating, and threatens everyone in this room. And shockingly, at least 1 million of the 10 million species on this planet are right on the brink of extinction now. What's more, fossil fuel pollution is tangible, measurable, and enters the lungs of everyone, rich or poor. Pacific Palisades and Malibu are among the wealthiest places ever to exist on the earth. If you think your money's going to protect you, you are confused. We're in a global food market. We're in a global industry. And nowhere is going to be spared, even places sitting right by the cold Pacific Ocean. Our communities were not built for the 1,000-year flood every 5 years. This is Valencia. Hundreds of cars piled up, hundreds of people crushed, hundreds of year old city. Records going back hundreds of years. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Does that prove anything? Nope. But it's consistent with the increased risk we're facing. As my family evacuated during the recent fires, I recalled risk maps I share with students. Industry insurance data from First Street had estimated that 94% of every home lost in the Eaton fire had at least a 1 in 7 chance of burning in the next 30 years. One mortgage. This is every temperature measured on the earth since I was born. The bell curve, you know stats, that's the central tendency, 2, 3, 4, 5 standard deviations from the norm. Over here, you get the kind of extreme heat where you can't work on a roof in Phoenix because you're going to die. Or for that matter, Pakistan. That is a different planet than the one I started on. Many homes right in our area. All of this red, you see the prices? Those homes have between 35% and 55% chance of burning in the next 30 years, according to the best estimates. You're flipping a coin with your most valuable and emotionally important asset, and maybe your life, by the way. The odds are a little bit better in Russian roulette. So we're on the precipice. Hold on a second. I'm gonna make rock some stuff. We're on the precipice of something pretty bleak. I think I've made that clear. I want to let someone more authoritative than myself make that point to you in about 1.5 minutes.
For a moment and look at where we are. The foundation of our civilization is a stable climate and a rich, diverse life. Everything, I mean everything, is based on. Civilization has thrived in a Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not to coach. This is what we have had for 10,000 years since we left the last ice age. Let's zoom out a little here. Breathe in here. Temperatures have never broken through the 2 degrees Celsius limit. Earth has self-regulated within a very narrow range of +2 degrees in the warmer glacial, -4 degrees deep ice age. Now, we are following a path that would take us to a 3 to 4 degree world in just 3 generations. We would be rewinding the climate clock not 1 billion, not 2 billion, but 5 to 10 million years. We are drifting towards hot here. For each 1 degree rise, 1 billion people will be forced to live in conditions that we today largely consider uninhabitable. This is not a climate emergency, it is a planetary emergency.
So obviously we got to do something. So the question now becomes, what can we do? And to paraphrase Jonathan Swift, I don't want anyone to eat the babies, but if you know the essay, to paraphrase Jonathan Swift, I have 3 modest proposals. The first is Winston Churchill's famous aphorism that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. We must recommit to it despite its flaws. Students tell me all the time that why should I vote? Democracy doesn't work. And then I have them look up what percentage of millionaires vote. And it's way above 90. They're voting because it does work. And it works for those who vote. And the youngest and the poorest, as you may know, vote at the lowest rates. Guess who the politicians care about? I'll give you 3 guesses. Right? Most importantly, we're going to have to get factual information into the public. We'll talk about that at the end. That's the hardest part. And I wish I had the answer. I'd be very rich and famous. That's the hardest part. Second, I have a related proposition. Science is the worst way of knowing how the world works, except for all the others ever tried. It has greatly improved lives, especially when intelligently applied by governments. Think running water, chlorination, toilets, vector mosquito control. In Sweden, in 1810, the richest country on earth, the only one we have data for, the only place that could keep numbers, they like to joke at that point. Not quite true.
Right.
This is how many babies died before age 5. The richest people in Sweden lost 1/3 of all their children by 5. They already were very rich. They had lots of peasants and lots of aristocrats. Today, almost no child in Sweden will die by age 5. It's 0.5% now. So things have mostly gotten better, not worse. And by the way, this is most true in the developing world, where they've seen the most progress because they had the furthest to go. Of course, there are exceptions, and we need to care about those exceptions. Finally, I think we need a new form of nationalism, not one focused on demonizing others and outsiders, but one centered on loving our compatriots, enough to ensure they have clean air, clean water, affordable housing. Some of you will nod your heads now, I hope, right? Meaningful jobs and a sustainable future. True patriotism means caring for our fellow citizens and for the land and air we share. This will safeguard America and allow us to continue to lead. And it might just grant us the peace of mind and sense of mission that most humans need to thrive. It's hard to do well if all you believe in is yourself and shopping. And we're being told to just believe in ourselves and shop. But it's not working. We do have a crisis of loneliness in this country. Here's something that should surprise you. Some of America's greatest environmental achievements were heralded by unlikely sources. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Richard Nixon signed them into law. The Montreal Protocol that saved Earth's ozone layer, Ronald Reagan. The 1990 Clean Air Act amendment for sulfur dioxide and acid rain, George Herbert Walker Bush. These Republican presidents used to understand that protecting our environment isn't just right, it's economically smart. The science is clear, the mass protests were important and persuasive, and leaders from both parties followed Gandhi's famous maxim that if the people lead, the leaders will follow, they always have. But I think we've lost a lot of hope, both left and right. I think nihilism has become fashionable. And that's dangerous. Martin Luther King Jr., who I am not, obviously, changed America's race relations not by saying, I keep having a nightmare. He famously said, I have a dream about little white children and little black children, and little brown children together. So we need a dream. Franklin Roosevelt told us that what we really need to fear is fear itself. As Reverend King famously said, let us not wallow in the valley of despair. Pessimism is an action. To make anything possible in your life or in politics, you have to imagine it first. I'm tired of dystopian movies where everyone's eating each other in the future, where it's all violence. That's not the dream we want. I miss Star Trek, right? Where they dreamed of a clean future where everybody was getting along. We need to have good dreams. I have children. I imagine a future for them where they will find good, sustainable jobs, encounter less homelessness, live in a city with plentiful, affordable, energy-efficient homes so they can live out their dreams. I dream of electric vehicles, windmills, solar panels, virtual power plants, vehicle-to-grid storage, bike paths, public green spaces, clean air. I imagine knowing many more of my neighbors because we see each other walking or biking to work. These aren't utopian fantasies. They're emerging realities and ethical commandments. When I first started telling GCC we need to get solar panels on the upper parking lot, the price of solar had come way down, and I showed this graph and said, hey man, it's cheap now. We got to do it. Last time I checked was yesterday, it's 24 cents a watt now. Solar is almost free now. And if you don't think we're going to get almost all of our energy in the future from solar and wind, you're not looking at the data. You're not even thinking about the data. I also think we got to remember that we faced huge challenges before. Roosevelt organized society to fight extreme poverty and started Social Security. Truman mobilized America to confront autocratic enemies. Eisenhower built an interstate highway system using tax dollars that made Jeff Bezos rich, by the way. Somebody has to deliver that stuff on somebody's road. Many protest that addressing climate change is going to cost too much or be too hard. But what does inaction cost? And what is your plan? Because I want to hear your plan. Uruguay is not a rich country by our standards. They have gone from 16% green electricity in my career to 95%. And they live on a fraction of the income that we do. These are Democratic states. These are Republican-leaning states. This is installed wind power. I have a president who tells me that wind power doesn't work, that it's a myth, and I have Texas and Oklahoma farmers putting them all over the place. Don't tell me it's because they're tree-hugging liberals. They're doing it because they work. They're doing it because it takes about 16 to 18 months to pay for the carbon you put into it, and they're guaranteed to work for 30 years. Free energy from solar energy. Wind is solar energy too. And this has resulted in the massive explosion of solar we see around the world. It's still not enough. Both are true. I also think that solar installers, wind technicians, energy efficiency experts, sustainable architects are going to be the fastest growing jobs in the future and already are in some regions of the United States. In many regions, those jobs are growing at twice the average rate. These jobs can't be outsourced. And there are real costs involved. We're already losing trillions globally in GDP to air pollution and climate change disasters. Trillions. It's estimated by the latest studies that somewhere, they can't know for sure, between 10 and 20% of global GDP will be permanently lost by 2060 if we don't act now. That's a permanent recession. It's not like other recessions where we recover, because vicious cycles are making it harder and harder and harder to thrive. And of course, some people will do fine, but many will not. So let's be clear-eyed about this. The sacrifices involved pale in comparison to those of previous generations. Don't tell me you're upset that you're going to pay a little bit more for your car, which you're not anymore anyway. They're cheaper to own over even 3 years. You don't even have to sacrifice any. I don't want to wait in line to charge. You're saving the future. Just got back from Vegas with my kid. We charged multiple times. We had to wait in line twice. We talked to some very nice people. If you stay in your car all alone, you're not happier, even if you think you are. Studies show otherwise. Imagine the young man handed a gun and said, to protect the future, I need you to storm the beach and take out that Nazi machine gun nest. And they did it en masse. Today, we fight only our base instincts and our perilous short-sightedness, not a terrifying foreign adversary with homicidal tendencies. When President Kennedy set us on a course to the moon in '62, some of you will know this famous speech. We do these things, he said, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. 7 years later, in the year I was born, 2 men walked on the moon. The impossible became possible. That's the picture they took on the way. It's the most published picture in the history of the world still. The sustainable energy future is not a hellscape from a dystopian movie. It's more Star Trek than Mad Max. It means abundance, innovation, quieter streets, healthier children. It's a better America in almost every way. And yet, many of us are still stumbling around in the dark with no way to see where we should be going. The truth is, the enemies of science and technology don't have solutions. Concentrating power in the executive branch, firing watchdogs and inspectors general, stifling academic progress and freedom, banning phrases and words, targeting journalists and judges will not make us great. They will undermine our safety, our security, and our prosperity. The future may look bleak, but we will continue to bend the curve. We must quickly stop emissions, but not so quickly that we trigger an economic calamity. It's complicated, it's subtle, it's complex, and binary thinking isn't going to help us. On both sides of the aisle, we talk less today in national elections about climate change than we did 30 years ago. That is a terrible failure of both parties. So I feel we stand right now at a turning point between our rational scientific hope and retreating back into falsehood. We risk turning our back on 80 years of mostly progress that many on the left and the right seem to refuse to believe made us healthier and stronger and better. To reassure you, finally, those of you most worried, we don't matter as much as you think we do. I checked this morning. I asked Claude and ChatGPT and a couple of others, and then I checked the source. 86% of carbon dioxide released last year did not come from the United States. The climate change battle will not be lost or won based on what we do, no matter who we elect. Moreover, the cheapest energy on the planet now is wind and solar. And so people are going to do the right thing, even if they don't believe the right thing, and that's hopeful. It's unstoppable now, the energy transformation. There is some bad news. Here's the good news. When I first started teaching here, it looked like we were headed for 5 degrees Celsius climate change. That's like 9 degrees, 8.5 degrees. That's Mad Max. That's people eating each other kind of stuff. We pretended we were going to get to 1.5. We'll break through that in the next 5 years, I think. It looks like we're headed somewhere in here, which is bad news. But it's a hell of a lot better than that. Both are true. There's a journalist named David Wallace Wells. He wrote a horrifying book. I don't recommend it. It's brilliant and well documented. It's called The Uninhabitable Earth. He's not an environmentalist. He lives in New York City. He'll go hiking, but he had a child. And he's like, what are these scientists talking about? Is this real? So he did 3 years of research, talked to scientists all over the world, and then he came out with The Uninhabitable Earth. He concludes this way. No matter how hot it gets, we still have the ability to make successive decades relatively less hot. And we should never stop trying. There is always something we can do. It is too late now to avoid a 21st century transformed by climate change, but we must do everything possible to make the future cooler, safer, and healthier. That must be our attitude because the alternative is unimaginable. Mostly, we're wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And that tends to make us easy to scare. That helps autocrats and tyrants take control of us. Amazingly, anthropologists and archaeologists tell us we have controlled fire for more than 500,000 years, for longer than we've been human. I'm going to argue that that terror of fire that has made every other species tremble ever since, it's finally time for us to control the fires that are likely to control us. The era of fossil fuels is going to be a very short part of human history, but it may affect us for thousands of years what we're doing now. As Greenland and Iceland melt, that is likely not in human terms reversible. And that's not good news. Finally, I believe that the only way we're going to face this is to tell hopeful stories, to make political campaigns and films, there's a filmmaker in the back, and TV shows that imagine a better world that can get the vast majority of Americans excited about doing something, so that we elect people in both parties who seek to protect and expand on much of what has made us strong, and we'll use the best of science, government, and the marketplace to lock in these benefits. I think Mr. Sagan would agree. Here he is in 1981. I watched this as a child.
More here we a difficult branch points in history. What we do in our world right now, again, done over centuries, or the effect of our descent. It is well within our power to destroy our civilization, and perhaps our species as well. If we capitulate superstition, like greed, it pulls our world into doctors deeper in the time between what civilization and the Italian Renaissance. But we are also capable of using our compassion and our intelligence, our technology and our wealth to make the funding and meaningful life can be happen with climate.
Doc, like Mr. Sagan,
Which is
I have a big, beautiful, and yes, utopian dream that I share with my friends and my students and my children and my family. Don't you? Doc, please help me save these people. Thank you. Doc. Thank you so much. As you can probably tell, I care a lot. It sometimes makes me too vociferous, whatever the right word is. I thought we'd have more time, but the Kahoot took longer than I thought. It was kind of fun, I hope. I did want to make sure I'll put the URL up there for those of you who want to look at it. There are things we can do. I wish we had more time for that. Future discussions in this series are going to talk a lot about that. I think you got to go on a diet. And there are sources of really good, I like to watch the Australian Broadcasting Corporation because they don't have a stake in the fight. And so they got to explain everything to people who don't know. These are places I trust. I don't care if it's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. They both fact check. They both put accurate reporting. I don't like the editorial page, but the reporting is excellent. Read a good book, by the way. What's that? Doc? Did you know there's an AI tool that only pulls from peer-reviewed journals? Called Consensus, and you get 10 free a month. You've got a new drug you're worried about? Check. It gives you a lit review that a doctor used to take a week to do. It only pulls from peer-reviewed published journals. It doesn't hallucinate anything that's not in a journal. There's a lot of good information out there, but you got to look for it because your outrage machine is confusing you. And me too. I'm human too, as you can probably tell. Finally, you got to do something. Get off your butt. I'm doing my part now. Plus, I have 2 electric cars years earlier than I thought I would. I have solar panels all over my roof. I send money to Grid Alternatives, which is a great group. Grid Alternatives puts in solar for communities that can't afford it, and therefore they don't buy electricity from the local utility anymore. I just figured out how much carbon my family released flying off to Amsterdam, and then we sent that equivalent amount of money to Grid Alternatives. I think it's better than planting trees because you don't know if the trees are going to be cut down later. But I know the solar panel is going to be there for 30 years. There's things you can do, and I promise you, when you do something, you'll feel better. And that's worth something, even if you don't fix the problem. I always think about the suffragettes who lived and died and never saw change. The abolitionists who generation after generation died. The difference is we don't have generations. Doc, comments, questions? Outrage. Doc. Thoughts? Doc? Oh, well, I'll take that.